Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana had always been observant, perhaps too observant for her own good. At 11 years old, she possessed an unusual ability to notice things that adults thought they had hidden well. The grand corridors of Windsor Castle held many secrets, but none more troubling than what she had begun to piece together about her step-grandmother, Queen Camilla. It started on a crisp autumn morning when Charlotte was walking through the East Wing, heading to her private tutoring session. The sound of hushed voices drew her attention to a partially open door leading to one of the smaller drawing rooms. Her curiosity, inherited from both her father, Prince William, and her late grandmother, Princess Diana, compelled her to pause and listen. "The children are becoming too influential," came Camilla's distinctive voice, sharp with authority. "Charlotte, especially. The public adores her, and that could become problematic as she grows older." Charlotte pressed herself against the ornate wallpaper, her heart racing. She recognized the second voice as Lady Susan Pemberton, one of Camilla's closest confidants and ladies-in-waiting. "What do you propose we do, Your Majesty?" Lady Susan asked, her tone respectful but conspiratorial. "We need to ensure that Charlotte's public appearances are limited, controlled. I've already spoken to the communications team about reducing her visibility at family events. The focus should remain on the direct line of succession, not on a granddaughter who might overshadow future monarchs." Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. She had always wondered why her appearances at royal events had become less frequent over the past year. She had assumed it was because her parents wanted to protect her privacy, but now she realized there might be more sinister reasons at play. "And what about the Prince and Princess of Wales?" Lady Susan inquired. "Surely they'll notice if Charlotte's role is diminished." Camilla's laugh was cold and calculating. "William and Catherine are dealing with enough pressure as it is. A few strategic suggestions about protecting Charlotte's childhood will be sufficient. They trust my judgment, especially William. He sees me as the mother figure he never had after Diana's death." The mention of her grandmother's name made Charlotte's hands clench into small fists. She had heard stories about Diana from her father, about how beloved she was by the people, how she had connected with ordinary citizens in ways that transformed the monarchy. Charlotte had always felt a special connection to her grandmother's legacy, and now she understood why Camilla might see that as a threat. "There's something else," Camilla continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've been working with certain members of the press to shift public perception. Stories about Charlotte being difficult or too precocious for royal duties. Nothing too harsh, mind you, but enough to plant seeds of doubt about her suitability for a prominent royal role." Charlotte's eyes widened in shock. She had noticed some unflattering articles in recent weeks, small pieces that questioned whether she was too outspoken or whether her confident demeanor was inappropriate for a young royal. She had dismissed them as typical tabloid nonsense, but now she realized they were part of a coordinated campaign. "The goal," Camilla explained, "is to gradually reshape the narrative around the Wales children. George will be king one day, and that's fine. Louis is young enough that his role can be shaped as we see fit. But Charlotte has Diana's spark, and that's dangerous. The people loved Diana precisely because she was unpredictable, because she challenged the establishment. We cannot allow another Diana to emerge within the royal family." Lady Susan made a sound of agreement. "And the security detail? Some of them seem quite fond of the Princess Charlotte." "That's being addressed," Camilla said with satisfaction. "I've arranged for certain transfers. Anyone who shows excessive loyalty to the Wales children, particularly Charlotte, will find themselves reassigned to less prominent positions. We need people around the children who understand where their true loyalties should lie." Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes as she thought about some of her favorite security officers who had mysteriously been replaced in recent months. Officer Thompson, who had always shared stories about his own daughter and made her laugh during boring state functions, had suddenly been transferred to special duties at another royal residence. Officer Martinez, who had taught her basic self-defense moves and treated her like a capable young person rather than a fragile princess, had similarly disappeared from her detail. The conversation in the drawing room continued, but Charlotte had heard enough. She quietly slipped away from the door, her mind racing with the implications of what she had discovered. For the first time in her young life, she understood that being born into the royal family didn't just mean privilege and duty. It also meant being subject to political machinations and power plays that she was only beginning to comprehend. Over the following weeks, Charlotte began to pay closer attention to the dynamics within the royal household. She noticed how Camilla would subtly redirect conversations away from Charlotte's accomplishments during family dinners. When Charlotte had received an award for her essay about environmental conservation, Camilla had quickly changed the subject to George's progress in his studies. When photographers wanted to capture Charlotte interacting with young visitors during a charity event, Camilla had suggested that it might be better to focus on the adult royals instead. The young princess also began to observe the staff more carefully. She realized that many of the newer additions to the household staff seemed to report their observations about the Wales family directly to Camilla's office. Casual questions about Charlotte's interests, her friendships, and her opinions on various topics were clearly not as innocent as they had seemed. One particularly troubling incident occurred during a family weekend at Balmoral. Charlotte had been excited to show her grandfather, King Charles, a photography project she had been working on, a series of portraits of the castle staff that captured their personalities and dedication to their work. She had spent weeks preparing the presentation, hoping to share her passion for photography and her appreciation for the people who made their lives possible. However, when the time came for the presentation, Camilla had smoothly intervened. "Charles, darling, perhaps we should focus on more pressing matters this evening. Charlotte's little hobby project can wait for another time." The dismissive tone in the phrase "little hobby project" had stung deeply. Charlotte had watched as her grandfather, clearly exhausted from his royal duties, had simply nodded and moved on to other business. Later that evening, Charlotte had overheard Camilla speaking to her father on the phone. "William, I'm a bit concerned about Charlotte's photography obsession. It might be wise to redirect her energies toward more traditional royal pursuits. We don't want her developing too many independent interests that might conflict with her future duties." The conversation had revealed another layer of Camilla's strategy. It wasn't just about limiting Charlotte's public visibility. It was about shaping her private development as well. Every interest, every talent, every aspect of Charlotte's personality was being evaluated through the lens of how it might serve or threaten Camilla's vision for the monarchy. Charlotte began to feel increasingly isolated within her own family. Her parents, while loving and supportive, seemed unaware of the subtle campaign being waged against their daughter. They trusted Camilla's judgment and often deferred to her experience in royal matters. Her brothers, George and Louis, were too young or too focused on their own challenges to notice the patterns that Charlotte was beginning to see. The turning point came during a state dinner honoring the visiting president of France. Charlotte, along with her siblings, was scheduled to make a brief appearance to greet the distinguished guests. She had prepared carefully for the event, practicing her French and researching the cultural and political significance of the visit. She was genuinely excited about the opportunity to represent her generation of the royal family on the international stage. However, just hours before the dinner, Charlotte was informed that there had been a change of plans. Camilla's private secretary delivered the news with apologetic efficiency. Charlotte would not be attending the dinner after all. The official reason was that it would be more appropriate for George, as the future king, to represent the younger generation alone. Charlotte knew this was a lie. She had overheard enough conversations to understand that this was another strategic move to limit her visibility and influence. The French president had specifically requested to meet all 3 Wales children, having heard about Charlotte's environmental advocacy work that aligned with France's own sustainability initiatives. That night, as Charlotte lay in bed listening to the sounds of the state dinner floating up from the floors below, she made a decision. She was tired of being treated as a pawn in someone else's game. She was tired of watching her interests and talents being systematically dismissed or redirected. Most importantly, she was tired of allowing Camilla's fear of her grandmother's legacy to diminish her own potential. The young princess understood that she needed allies if she was going to challenge Camilla's schemes effectively, but she also knew that she had to be careful. Camilla had significant influence within the royal household, and any direct confrontation would likely be dismissed as the complaints of a child who didn't understand the complexities of royal life. Charlotte began to think about the people within the palace who might be willing to help her. She thought about the security officers who had been transferred, wondering if their loyalty to her family went deeper than their official duties. She thought about the longtime staff members who had served the royal family for decades and might have their own concerns about recent changes in the household dynamics. Most importantly, she began to consider how she might document the evidence of Camilla's schemes. Charlotte had inherited her mother's attention to detail and her grandmother Diana's intuitive understanding of how to communicate with people. If she could gather concrete proof of what was happening, she might be able to present a case that even the adults in her life would have to take seriously. The next morning, Charlotte began her own quiet investigation. She started paying attention to schedules, noting when her appearances were canceled or modified. She began keeping a diary, recording the conversations she overheard and the patterns she observed. She also started building relationships with staff members who seemed trustworthy, people who had worked for the royal family long enough to remember how things used to be. Officer James Peterson was one of the first people Charlotte approached. He had been part of her security detail since she was very young, and she had noticed that he seemed uncomfortable with some of the recent changes in protocol. Unlike the newer security personnel, Officer Peterson had worked for the royal family during her grandmother Diana's time, and Charlotte sensed that he might share her concerns about the current direction of royal family dynamics. Their first real conversation happened during a routine security check of the gardens at Kensington Palace. Charlotte had been walking alone, thinking about her next steps, when Officer Peterson approached her with his usual professional courtesy. "Princess Charlotte," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I hope you're enjoying your walk this morning." Charlotte studied his face for a moment before responding. "Officer Peterson, can I ask you something? Do you think things have changed much in the royal family over the past year or two?" The question clearly surprised him, but after a moment of consideration, he answered thoughtfully. "Change is natural in any organization, Your Royal Highness. People come and go, policies evolve, priorities shift." "But what if the changes aren't necessarily good changes?" Charlotte pressed. "What if they're being made for the wrong reasons?" Officer Peterson looked around carefully before responding, his voice lowered. "Princess, it's not my place to comment on family dynamics or policy decisions. But I will say this. In my experience, the best leaders are those who surround themselves with people who are loyal to the institution and its values, not just to individuals within it." The carefully worded response told Charlotte everything she needed to know. Officer Peterson had noticed the same troubling patterns she had observed, but as a member of the staff, he was limited in how directly he could address them. Over the following days, Charlotte began to have similar conversations with other longtime staff members. She discovered that her instincts had been correct. Many of the people who had served the royal family for years were concerned about recent changes but felt powerless to address them directly. Mrs. Casserow did the Eleanor Davies, who had been the head housekeeper at various royal residences for over 20 years, was particularly forthcoming during a chance encounter in the palace library. "Your grandmother, Princess Diana, she understood that the royal family's strength comes from its connection to the people," Mrs. Davies said quietly. She knew that each member of the family had something unique to contribute. It would be a shame if that understanding was lost. These conversations gave Charlotte both validation and a growing sense of responsibility. She realized that her situation was about more than just her own treatment within the family. The systematic diminishing of her role was part of a larger shift in how the monarchy was being managed, a shift that might ultimately weaken the institution her family was meant to serve. Charlotte also began to understand that her unique position as a young royal gave her certain advantages in addressing these issues. Adults might dismiss her concerns as childish complaints, but they also might underestimate her ability to gather information and build support for her cause. Her age and apparent innocence allowed her to move through the palace and ask questions that would be more suspicious coming from an adult. As autumn turned to winter, Charlotte's investigation began to yield more concrete evidence of Camilla's schemes. She discovered that several staff members who had been dismissed or transferred had been replaced by people with direct connections to Camilla's personal household. She found copies of communication strategies that explicitly mentioned reducing Charlotte's visibility in favor of other family members. Most damning of all, she uncovered correspondence between Camilla's office and certain media outlets that confirmed the coordinated effort to shape public perception of Charlotte in negative ways. The evidence was compelling, but Charlotte knew that presenting it effectively would require careful planning and strategic thinking. She needed to find the right moment and the right allies to ensure that her revelations would be taken seriously rather than dismissed as the imaginative complaints of an unhappy child. As she continued to gather information and build relationships with trustworthy staff members, Charlotte felt a growing confidence in her ability to challenge Camilla's schemes. She was no longer the helpless victim of someone else's political maneuvering. She was becoming an active participant in shaping her own destiny and protecting the values that she believed the royal family should represent. The young princess understood that the confrontation with Camilla was inevitable, but she was determined to be prepared when that moment arrived. She would not allow fear or manipulation to diminish her potential or silence her voice. After all, she carried the legacy of Princess Diana in her blood, and that legacy included the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it meant challenging those in power. Winter was approaching, and with it would come new opportunities and challenges. Charlotte felt ready to face them with a clarity of purpose that would have made her grandmother proud. The schemes and manipulations that had seemed so overwhelming just months before now appeared manageable, even defeatable. She had allies, evidence, and most importantly, she had found her own strength. The game was far from over, but for the first time since discovering Camilla's plans, Charlotte felt like she had a real chance of winning. The Christmas season at Sandringham Estate brought with it an unexpected opportunity for Charlotte to deepen her understanding of the forces working against her. The annual gathering of the extended royal family created a more relaxed atmosphere, where people let their guards down, and conversations flowed more freely. Charlotte had learned to use these occasions to her advantage, moving quietly through the grand rooms and listening carefully to the discussions that adults thought were private. On Christmas Eve morning, while the family prepared for the traditional church service, Charlotte discovered a meeting taking place in King Charles's private study. Through a crack in the heavy oak door, she could see Camilla seated across from her grandfather, with several folders spread across the mahogany desk between them. "Charles, we need to discuss the children's roles for the coming year," Camilla was saying, her tone businesslike and authoritative. "I've prepared a comprehensive plan for managing their public exposure and ensuring that their development aligns with our strategic objectives." Charlotte's grandfather looked tired, as he often did these days. The weight of the crown seemed to age him more rapidly than the years themselves. "What are you proposing?" he asked, rubbing his temples. Camilla opened one of the folders with practiced efficiency. "For George, we continue with his current trajectory. He's the heir, so his preparation for future responsibilities takes priority. We can gradually increase his public appearances and begin introducing him to more complex royal duties." "And Charlotte?" Charles asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer might not please him. "Charlotte requires more careful management," Camilla replied smoothly. "She's becoming increasingly assertive. Last month, she questioned why she wasn't included in the environmental summit reception. She's also been asking staff members about palace operations in ways that suggest she's developing opinions about how things should be run." Charlotte felt a flash of anger at the way Camilla described her curiosity and engagement as problematic behaviors. The environmental summit had been directly related to her own advocacy work, and her questions to staff members had been motivated by genuine interest in understanding how the royal household functioned. "Perhaps that shows initiative and leadership," Charles suggested mildly. Diana was similarly curious at that age. The mention of her grandmother's name seemed to irritate Camilla, though she maintained her composed exterior. Diana's curiosity led to certain complications. "We have an opportunity to guide Charlotte toward a more traditional understanding of her role, one that complements rather than competes with the primary line of succession." Charlotte noticed how Camilla consistently framed her natural interests and abilities as problems to be solved rather than assets to be developed. It was becoming clear that Camilla's objection to her wasn't based on any specific behavior or shortcoming, but on the fundamental threat that a confident, capable Charlotte represented to Camilla's vision of royal hierarchy. "I've also been in communication with several boarding schools," Camilla continued, producing another document from her folder. "Schools that specialize in preparing young people for lives of service, but within more traditional frameworks. Charlotte might benefit from a more structured environment, away from the palace where she's perhaps receiving too much individual attention." Charles looked up sharply at this suggestion. "William and Catherine haven't mentioned anything about sending Charlotte to boarding school. They've been quite committed to keeping the children at home for their primary education." "Well," Camilla said with a slight smile, "sometimes parents are too close to the situation to see what's best for their children's long-term development. I have more perspective on how royal children should be prepared for their futures. After all, I've had to learn these lessons myself. Charlotte realized that Camilla was positioning herself as the expert on royal child-rearing, despite having no direct experience raising children who were born into the monarchy. The audacity of suggesting that her parents were inadequate guardians of their own children's development was breathtaking. The conversation continued with Camilla outlining various strategies for limiting Charlotte's independence and redirecting her energies toward what she called more appropriate pursuits. She had researched specific activities and interests that would keep Charlotte busy but politically neutral, ensuring that she developed skills that would make her useful to the monarchy without allowing her to develop her own platform or following. There's also the matter of her social circle, Camilla added. Charlotte has been forming friendships with children from various backgrounds, including some families that might not share our values or understand the importance of discretion. We should encourage her to spend more time with the children of our trusted allies, people who understand how to maintain appropriate boundaries. Charlotte felt a chill as she realized that even her friendships were being evaluated and potentially manipulated. Some of her closest friends came from families that her parents had met through their charitable work. Children whose parents were doctors, teachers, and community leaders. The idea that these relationships might be seen as threatening because they connected Charlotte to ordinary people outside the royal bubble was deeply disturbing. King Charles seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Camilla, I appreciate your concern for Charlotte's development, but some of these suggestions seem quite drastic. William and Catherine are excellent parents, and Charlotte appears to be thriving under their guidance. Charles? Camilla's voice took on a slightly sharper edge. You asked me to help guide this family through the complexities of modern royal life. That sometimes means making difficult decisions that prioritize long-term stability over short-term comfort. Charlotte is at a crucial age where her character and understanding of her role are being formed. If we don't provide proper guidance now, we may face much more serious challenges later. The implicit threat in Camilla's words was clear. She was suggesting that failing to control Charlotte now would lead to bigger problems in the future. Problems that might threaten the stability of the monarchy itself. Charlotte understood that she was being painted as a potential liability, someone whose natural confidence and curiosity could become dangerous if not properly channeled. After the meeting ended, and the participants had left the study, Charlotte remained hidden in the hallway, processing what she had learned. The scope of Camilla's plans was more extensive than she had realized. It wasn't just about limiting her public appearances or redirecting her interests. Camilla was proposing a comprehensive restructuring of Charlotte's life, from her education to her friendships to her basic understanding of her role within the royal family. That evening, during the traditional Christmas Eve dinner, Charlotte observed the family dynamics with new eyes. She watched how Camilla subtly guided conversations away from topics that might allow Charlotte to showcase her knowledge or interests. When Uncle Harry called from California to wish the family well, Camilla quickly moved to end the conversation before Charlotte could speak with him at length. When Charlotte mentioned a book she had been reading about her grandmother Diana's humanitarian work, Camilla smoothly redirected attention to George's recent achievements in his studies. The pattern was consistent and deliberate. Camilla was systematically erasing Charlotte's voice from family interactions while positioning herself as the ultimate authority on what was appropriate and beneficial for the royal children. Over the following days, Charlotte began to test the boundaries of Camilla's control more deliberately. She started expressing her opinions more clearly during family discussions, asking direct questions about royal policies and traditions, and demonstrating her knowledge about topics that interested her. Each time she watched carefully to see how Camilla responded. The reactions were telling. When Charlotte spoke knowledgeably about environmental policy during a discussion about the king's sustainability initiatives, Camilla quickly suggested that Charlotte might be getting too caught up in complex issues that are better left to adults. When Charlotte mentioned her interest in learning more about the Commonwealth countries and their histories, Camilla wondered aloud whether such ambitious academic pursuits might be overwhelming for someone her age. Charlotte began to understand that no matter how thoughtful or well-informed her contributions were, Camilla would find ways to dismiss them as inappropriate or concerning. The goal was not to improve Charlotte's understanding or skills, but to undermine her confidence and limit her sense of agency within the family. During the New Year period, Charlotte discovered another crucial piece of the puzzle when she overheard a phone conversation between Camilla and someone identified only as Richard. The conversation revealed that Camilla had been working with certain members of the Royal Communications team to develop what she called narrative management strategies regarding the whale's children. "Richard, I need you to understand that Charlotte's profile needs to be carefully managed," Camilla was saying. "The public's affection for her is touching, but it could become problematic if she's seen as too independent or too much like her grandmother. We need stories that emphasize her youth and the importance of her focusing on education rather than public duties." The person on the other end of the conversation apparently raised some objections because Camilla's tone became more insistent. "I'm not asking for anything inappropriate," she continued. "Just subtle emphasis on the fact that she's still a child who needs guidance. Stories about her interests should always include context about how her parents and I are helping to shape those interests in positive directions. We don't want articles that make her sound too precocious or too ready for adult responsibilities." Charlotte realized that this explained the shift she had noticed in recent media coverage. Stories about her environmental work now always included phrases like, "with careful parental guidance," or "under the watchful eye of experienced royals." Articles about her academic achievements were framed as evidence of good royal parenting rather than as celebrations of her individual accomplishments. The conversation continued with discussion of specific journalists and media outlets that could be relied upon to frame stories about Charlotte in appropriate ways. Camilla had clearly cultivated a network of media relationships that allowed her to influence how the royal children were perceived by the public. "The goal," Camilla explained, "is to maintain public affection for Charlotte while ensuring that she's not seen as a potential rival to George or as someone who might challenge traditional royal hierarchies. She can be beloved, but she needs to be beloved in the right way, as a supporting character rather than as a potential star." This revelation helped Charlotte understand why she sometimes felt frustrated by media coverage that seemed to diminish her actual contributions to royal events. She had assumed that journalists simply didn't understand her work or interests, but now she realized that the coverage was being deliberately shaped to minimize her impact and influence. Armed with this new understanding, Charlotte began to develop a more sophisticated strategy for addressing Camilla's schemes. She realized that direct confrontation would be ineffective because Camilla held too much influence over family decision-making. Instead, she needed to find ways to document Camilla's behavior and build a coalition of supporters who could help her present evidence of what was happening. Charlotte started keeping more detailed records of the conversations she overheard and the patterns she observed. She began taking photographs of documents when opportunities arose, being careful to avoid detection. She also started building stronger relationships with staff members who seemed trustworthy and concerned about the direction of royal family management. Mrs. Davies proved to be particularly helpful in this regard. During a conversation in the palace kitchen, she shared her own concerns about recent changes in household management. "Your grandmother, Princess Diana, she believed that each royal child should be encouraged to develop their own strengths," Mrs. Davies said quietly while preparing afternoon tea. She thought that diversity of interests and personalities within the family made the monarchy stronger, not weaker. It's concerning to see that philosophy being abandoned in favor of more rigid approaches. Through Mrs. Davies, Charlotte learned that several other longtime staff members shared similar concerns. These were people who had worked for the royal family for decades and had observed how different management approaches affected the institution's effectiveness and public perception. Charlotte also discovered that some of the security personnel who had been transferred were still in communication with current staff members and remained concerned about the whale's children's welfare. Officer Peterson had maintained contact with former colleagues and was quietly monitoring developments within the household. One particularly significant ally emerged in the form of Miss Sarah Mitchell, who had recently been hired as an assistant in the Royal Archives. Miss Mitchell had previously worked for various historical institutions and brought a deep understanding of royal history and constitutional principles to her new role. Unlike many of the newer staff members who seemed focused on pleasing Camilla, Miss Mitchell appeared genuinely committed to serving the broader interests of the monarchy as an institution. During a chance encounter in the Royal Library, Miss Mitchell made a comment that suggested she understood the historical significance of what was happening. Throughout British history, she said while helping Charlotte find resources for a school project, the monarchy has been strongest when it embraced the unique contributions of different family members, rather than trying to force everyone into identical roles. Queen Elizabeth I, for example, succeeded precisely because she was allowed to develop her own approach to leadership, even when it differed from traditional expectations. The comment was clearly meant to encourage Charlotte to think about her situation in historical context, and it suggested that Ms. Mitchell might be willing to provide more direct support if needed. As winter turned to spring, Charlotte's understanding of Camilla's schemes became more complete, but her sense of urgency also increased. She realized that Camilla's plans were not just theoretical proposals, but active strategies that were already affecting Charlotte's life in measurable ways. Her public appearances had decreased significantly, her input on family decisions was being systematically dismissed, and even her private interests were being redirected toward activities that Camilla deemed more appropriate. Most concerning of all, Charlotte began to notice that her relationships with her parents were being subtly influenced by Camilla's interventions. Her mother and father, while still loving and supportive, seemed more likely to defer to Camilla's judgment about Charlotte's activities and development. They trusted Camilla's experience and expertise, not realizing that her advice was motivated by strategic considerations rather than genuine concern for Charlotte's well-being. Charlotte understood that she was approaching a critical moment in her young life. She could either accept Camilla's vision for her future, becoming a compliant and diminished version of herself, or she could find the courage to challenge the systems that were working to constrain her potential. The choice was becoming clearer each day, and Charlotte found herself increasingly determined to fight for her right to develop into the person she was meant to become. Spring brought with it a series of events that would test Charlotte's resolve and push her toward the confrontation she had been both dreading and preparing for. The occasion was the annual Commonwealth Day celebration, a significant event in the royal calendar that traditionally showcased the entire family's commitment to the international community of nations that looked to the British monarchy for leadership. Charlotte had been excited about participating in the Commonwealth Day events because they aligned perfectly with her growing interest in international relations and cultural exchange. She had spent weeks preparing for the occasion, studying the histories and cultures of various Commonwealth countries, and developing ideas for how young people could contribute to strengthening these important relationships. However, just days before the celebration, Charlotte discovered that her role in the events had been significantly reduced. Instead of participating in the main ceremony at Westminster Abbey and the subsequent reception for Commonwealth representatives, she would only attend a brief photo opportunity with other family members. The decision had been presented to her parents as coming from the Archbishop's office, with concerns raised about the appropriateness of having too many young royals participate in such a solemn religious ceremony. However, Charlotte's investigation revealed that the real source of the change was Camilla's office, working through intermediaries to create the appearance of external pressure. Charlotte found the evidence she needed in a series of emails that had been carelessly left accessible on a shared computer in one of the administrative offices. The correspondence showed clear communication between Lady Susan Pemberton and various officials, orchestrating the reduction of Charlotte's role while ensuring that the decision appeared to come from legitimate liturgical concerns rather than from deliberate exclusion. The emails also revealed something even more troubling. Camilla had been working to ensure that Charlotte's absence from major portions of the Commonwealth Day celebration would go largely unnoticed by the media and the public. Stories had been planted suggesting that Charlotte was focusing intensively on her studies, and that her reduced public schedule reflected her parents' commitment to prioritizing her education over royal duties. Reading these communications, Charlotte felt a mixture of anger and determination that surprised her with its intensity. She realized that she was no longer just defending herself against Camilla's schemes, she was fighting for the principles that she believed should guide the royal family's service to the nation and the Commonwealth. That evening, Charlotte made a decision that would change the trajectory of her struggle against Camilla's manipulation. She decided to reach out directly to her Uncle Harry in California. Despite the tensions that had developed between Harry and the rest of the royal family, Charlotte instinctively felt that he would understand her situation in ways that other adult family members might not. The phone call was arranged through Mrs. Questriam Davies, who had maintained contact with staff members who had worked for Harry during his time as an active royal. The conversation took place late at night, when Charlotte could speak privately, without risk of being overheard by those who might report back to Camilla. "Uncle Harry," Charlotte began, her voice steady despite her nervousness, "I need to talk to someone who understands what it's like to feel trapped by royal expectations and manipulations." Harry's response was immediate and warm. "Charlotte, I'm so glad you called. I've been worried about you and your brothers, but I haven't known how to reach out without causing more problems for your parents." Charlotte found herself pouring out months of frustration and concern, describing the patterns she had observed and the evidence she had gathered. Harry listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated his understanding of the complex dynamics within the royal household. "What you're describing," Harry said finally, "sounds very familiar to me. It's a pattern of control and manipulation that I experienced myself, though it manifested differently because of my position in the family. The goal is always the same: to ensure that individual family members serve the institution in ways that benefit those in power, rather than developing their own authentic voices and contributions." The validation from someone who had lived through similar experiences was incredibly meaningful to Charlotte. For the first time in months, she felt truly understood by an adult who recognized the legitimacy of her concerns. "The question is," Harry continued, "what do you want to do about it? You have several options, and each one carries different risks and potential benefits." They discussed various strategies, from direct confrontation with her parents to quiet resistance to gathering more evidence before making any moves. Harry's perspective was invaluable because he understood both the family dynamics and the broader implications of challenging established power structures within the monarchy. "One thing I learned," Harry advised, "is that timing is crucial. You need to choose your moment carefully, when you have the best chance of being heard, and when the consequences of speaking out will be manageable. You also need to be prepared for the possibility that some people won't believe you or won't want to address what you're telling them." The conversation ended with Harry promising to provide ongoing support and guidance as Charlotte navigated these challenges. He also offered to serve as a resource if she ever needed someone to corroborate her experiences or provide historical context for the patterns she was observing. Armed with this new support and validation, Charlotte began to develop a more ambitious plan for addressing Camilla's schemes. She realized that she needed to move beyond simply gathering evidence and begin taking active steps to protect herself and challenge the systems that were working to diminish her potential. The first part of her plan involved building a stronger network of allies within the royal household. Charlotte began having more deliberate conversations with staff members who seemed trustworthy, sharing her concerns and asking for their observations about recent changes in palace operations. These conversations revealed that many staff members had indeed noticed troubling patterns, but had felt powerless to address them directly. Mrs. Davies, Officer Peterson, Miss Sanders and Boston Rosen, Mitchell, and several others had all observed the systematic efforts to limit Charlotte's influence and development, but they had been uncertain about how to respond appropriately given their positions within the household hierarchy. Charlotte proposed that they begin documenting these patterns more systematically, creating a record of incidents and decisions that demonstrated the scope and deliberate nature of Camilla's campaign against her. This documentation would serve multiple purposes. It would provide concrete evidence if direct confrontation became necessary. It would help the staff members feel more empowered to resist inappropriate instructions, and it would create a network of people committed to protecting the authentic development of the royal children. The second part of Charlotte's plan involved finding ways to maintain and develop her interests and abilities despite the obstacles being placed in her path. She began organizing informal educational activities that allowed her to pursue her interests in environmental science, international relations, and photography without requiring official approval or generating public attention that might trigger Camilla's interference. Miss Mitchell proved particularly helpful in this regard, arranging access to historical documents and resources that supported Charlotte's academic interests while maintaining the appearance of routine library research. Officer Peterson facilitated opportunities for Charlotte to meet with various experts and professionals who visited the palace, allowing her to engage in meaningful conversations about topics that interested her. These informal educational opportunities helped Charlotte maintain her intellectual momentum while also building relationships with adults outside the immediate royal circle who could provide objective perspectives on her abilities and potential. The third part of Charlotte's plan was perhaps the most ambitious. She decided to begin creating her own record of royal family dynamics and decision-making processes. This would involve carefully documenting the conversations she overheard, the decisions that affected her and her siblings, and the patterns of influence and manipulation that she observed. The documentation would be more than just a personal diary. It would be a systematic analysis of how power operated within the royal household and how those power dynamics affected the family's ability to serve the public effectively. Charlotte understood that this record might someday be valuable not just for protecting herself, but for helping future generations of royal children navigate similar challenges. As Charlotte began implementing her plan, she discovered that taking active steps to resist Camilla's schemes gave her a sense of agency and purpose that had been missing during the months when she felt helpless against forces beyond her control. She was no longer just a victim of other people's political maneuvering. She was becoming an active participant in shaping her own destiny. However, Charlotte's increased assertiveness did not go unnoticed. Camilla began to observe Charlotte more carefully, and her responses to Charlotte's behavior became more pointed and direct. During family dinners, Camilla would make comments about the importance of young royals understanding their place within the family hierarchy. When Charlotte expressed opinions about current events or royal policies, Camilla would suggest that such complex topics required more life experience to understand properly. The tension between Charlotte and Camilla was becoming more apparent to other family members, though most of them interpreted it as normal intergenerational friction rather than as evidence of a deeper conflict. King Charles occasionally made gentle suggestions about respecting elder family members and learning from their wisdom. Prince William and Princess Catherine encouraged Charlotte to be more patient with Camilla's guidance, reminding her that Camilla had their family's best interests at heart. These well-intentioned but misguided interventions from her family members were particularly frustrating for Charlotte. She understood that her parents and grandfather genuinely believed that Camilla was trying to help, and she struggled with how to explain the reality of the situation without sounding like a petulant child who simply didn't want to follow rules. The breakthrough came during a family meeting about summer plans and schedules. The discussion involved decisions about which family members would participate in various royal engagements and how the children's activities would be structured during the school holiday period. Charlotte had prepared carefully for this meeting, developing thoughtful suggestions about how she might contribute to specific royal events based on her interests, and developing expertise. She was particularly excited about the possibility of participating in environmental summits and Commonwealth youth initiatives that would allow her to represent her generation's perspectives on important global issues. However, as the meeting progressed, Charlotte watched Camilla systematically dismiss or redirect every suggestion she made. When Charlotte proposed participating in a youth climate conference, Camilla wondered whether such events might be too politically charged for a young royal. When Charlotte suggested visiting Commonwealth countries to learn about their environmental conservation efforts, Camilla expressed concerns about the appropriateness of such ambitious travel for someone her age. What made the situation particularly frustrating was the way Camilla framed her objections. Each concern was presented as a thoughtful consideration of Charlotte's well-being or the royal family's reputation, making it difficult for other family members to recognize the pattern of systematic exclusion. Finally, Charlotte decided that she had heard enough. In a moment that would later be recognized as a turning point in royal family dynamics, she stood up and addressed the room with a clarity and authority that surprised everyone present. "I need to say something that might be uncomfortable for everyone to hear," Charlotte began, her voice steady and determined. "I've been observing patterns in how decisions about my participation in royal duties are made, and I believe there are considerations beyond my well-being or the family's reputation that are influencing these choices." The room fell silent. King Charles, Prince William, and Princess Catherine all looked surprised by Charlotte's serious tone and formal approach to addressing the family meeting. Camilla's expression remained carefully neutral, but Charlotte noticed a tension around her eyes that suggested alertness to potential threat. Charlotte continued, "I've noticed that my suggestions and interests are consistently dismissed or redirected, often for reasons that don't apply to other family members. I've also noticed that my public appearances have been reduced significantly over the past year, and that media coverage of my activities has been shaped in ways that minimize my contributions and emphasize my youth and need for guidance. Prince William started to interrupt, clearly intending to suggest that Charlotte might be misinterpreting normal royal protocols, but Charlotte raised her hand in a gesture that commanded attention. "I'm not finished," she said with quiet authority. "I understand that these might sound like the complaints of someone who wants more attention or responsibility than is appropriate for her age, but I've been gathering evidence of these patterns for months, and I believe that the decisions being made about my role are not based on legitimate concerns about my development or the family's interests." The silence in the room was now complete and charged with tension. Charlotte realized that she had reached the point of no return. She had committed herself to a direct confrontation that would either resolve the situation or escalate it dramatically. Looking directly at Camilla for the first time since beginning her speech, Charlotte continued, "I believe that some people in this family are more concerned about managing potential threats to established hierarchies than about helping me develop my abilities to serve the monarchy and the public effectively." The accusation was clear enough to be unmistakable, but indirect enough to allow for various interpretations. Charlotte had learned from her months of observation that direct accusations would be easily dismissed, but carefully presented evidence and analysis would be more difficult to ignore. Camilla's response was swift and strategic. "Charlotte, I think you may be misunderstanding the complex considerations that go into making decisions about royal duties and public appearances. These decisions require balancing many factors, including security concerns, constitutional protocols, and the overall strategic direction of the monarchy. It's natural for someone your age to want more involvement, but patience and trust in experienced guidance are important virtues for royal family members." The response was perfectly crafted to make Charlotte's concerns sound like immature impatience, while positioning Camilla as the wise adult trying to provide appropriate guidance. Charlotte recognized the rhetorical strategy immediately, and realized that she needed to respond with equal sophistication if she wanted to be taken seriously. "I understand that royal decision-making involves complex considerations," Charlotte replied calmly. "That's exactly why I've been studying these processes and documenting the patterns I've observed. I'm not asking for more involvement based on personal desires. I'm raising concerns about systematic exclusion that doesn't appear to be based on the legitimate factors you've mentioned." The conversation that followed would reshape the dynamics of the royal family and ultimately lead to significant changes in how power and influence were managed within the monarchy. But for Charlotte, the most important moment was simply finding the courage to speak her truth clearly and directly, regardless of the consequences that might follow. The aftermath of Charlotte's direct confrontation with Camilla during the family meeting created a seismic shift in the dynamics of the royal household. The room had fallen into an uncomfortable silence after Charlotte's carefully worded but unmistakable accusations, and the tension that followed would influence every interaction within the family for weeks to come. King Charles was the first to respond, his voice carrying the weight of his position but also revealing his genuine confusion about the situation his granddaughter was describing. "Charlotte, these are very serious allegations you're making. I think we need to understand exactly what you believe has been happening and what evidence you have to support your concerns." Charlotte had anticipated this request and had prepared accordingly. Over the following hour, she presented a detailed analysis of the patterns she had observed, complete with specific examples and documentation. She described the conversations she had overheard, the changes in her schedule and responsibilities that couldn't be explained by official reasons, and the systematic efforts to shape media coverage of her activities. The evidence was compelling and comprehensive. Charlotte had learned from her months of investigation that vague complaints would be easily dismissed, but concrete documentation of specific incidents would be much more difficult to ignore. She presented copies of emails, recordings of conversations, and a detailed timeline showing how her role within the family had been systematically diminished over the past year. Prince William and Princess Catherine listened with growing alarm as their daughter presented evidence that suggested their trust in Camilla's guidance had been misplaced. They had genuinely believed that Camilla's advice about Charlotte's development was motivated by concern for their daughter's well-being and proper preparation for her future role. "Charlotte," Princess Catherine said slowly, "if what you're describing is accurate, then we need to have some very serious conversations about how decisions are being made about our children's lives." Camilla's response to Charlotte's presentation was carefully calculated, and revealed the full extent of her political sophistication. Rather than denying the specific allegations, she reframed the entire discussion in terms of different philosophical approaches to royal child-rearing. "I think what we're seeing here," Camilla said with apparent thoughtfulness, "is a conflict between traditional approaches to preparing young royals for their responsibilities and more modern ideas about individual development and expression. Both approaches have merit, but they can lead to different conclusions about what's best for Charlotte and the other children." This reframing was strategically brilliant because it transformed the conversation from one about manipulation and control into one about legitimate differences of opinion regarding child development. It allowed Camilla to acknowledge that her approach differed from what Charlotte and her parents might prefer, while maintaining that her intentions had been positive. However, Charlotte was prepared for this strategy as well. She had spent considerable time thinking about how Camilla might respond to her accusations, and she had developed counter-arguments that would prevent the conversation from being derailed by philosophical discussions. "The issue isn't different approaches to child development," Charlotte said clearly. "The issue is making decisions about my life and opportunities without consulting me or my parents, and using manipulation and deception to implement those decisions. Even if someone believes that their approach is better than what my parents might choose, that doesn't justify bypassing my parents' authority or misleading them about what's happening." Anyway, this response demonstrated Charlotte's sophisticated understanding of both family dynamics and constitutional principles. She was arguing not just for her own interests, but for the fundamental principle that parents should have primary authority over their children's upbringing, and that this authority shouldn't be undermined through deceptive means. King Charles appeared increasingly troubled by the implications of what Charlotte was describing. "Camilla, I need to understand whether Charlotte's allegations have merit. Have you been making decisions about the children's activities and schedules without consulting William and Catherine? Have you been working with media outlets to influence coverage of Charlotte's activities?" The direct questions from the king put Camilla in a difficult position. She could hardly deny allegations for which Charlotte had provided specific documentation, but acknowledging them would confirm that she had overstepped appropriate boundaries in her relationship with the Wales family. "Charles," Camilla replied carefully, "I have been providing guidance and making suggestions based on my experience and my understanding of what's best for the family and the monarchy. Perhaps I should have been more transparent about the specific steps I was taking to implement what I believed were our shared goals." The admission was carefully worded but significant. Camilla was acknowledging that she had taken actions regarding the children without proper consultation, while still maintaining that her motivations had been appropriate. Charlotte recognized this as a crucial moment in the confrontation. Camilla was beginning to acknowledge the validity of at least some of the allegations, but she was still trying to frame her actions as well-intentioned mistakes rather than as deliberate attempts to undermine Charlotte's development and family relationships. "The problem with that explanation," Charlotte said, "is that the pattern of actions I've documented suggests a systematic campaign rather than well-intentioned guidance that happened to be implemented without proper consultation. The coordination with media outlets, the deliberate exclusion from events that aligned with my interests, the attempts to redirect my friendships and educational pursuits. These actions appear to be part of a comprehensive strategy to limit my influence and development." Prince William had been listening to this exchange with growing anger, and at this point, he intervened with a directness that surprised everyone in the room. "Camilla," he said, his voice controlled but clearly furious, "what Charlotte is describing sounds like a systematic violation of our family's trust and autonomy. If you've been manipulating our children's opportunities and manipulating media coverage without our knowledge or consent, then we have a serious problem that goes far beyond different approaches to child rearing." The conversation that followed was intense and sometimes heated, with various family members expressing their perspectives on what had happened and what should be done about it. Through it all, Charlotte maintained her composure and continued to present evidence and analysis that supported her allegations. One of the most significant moments came when Princess Catherine asked Charlotte directly about the personal impact of Camilla's schemes. "Charlotte, how has all of this affected you? How has it felt to experience what you believe has been systematic exclusion and manipulation?" Charlotte's response revealed the emotional toll that months of fighting against Camilla's schemes had taken on her, but it also demonstrated the strength and resilience she had developed through the struggle. "It's been frustrating and sometimes frightening," Charlotte admitted. "There were times when I wondered if I was imagining things or if I was being paranoid. It's difficult to trust your own perceptions when adults around you are telling you that your concerns aren't legitimate or that you're misunderstanding situations. She continued, but the most difficult part has been feeling like I had to choose between being true to myself and being a good family member. I felt like speaking up about these problems might be seen as being disloyal or troublesome, but staying quiet felt like accepting that my voice and my potential didn't matter. The emotional honesty of Charlotte's response seemed to affect everyone in the room, but it had a particularly strong impact on King Charles, who had experienced his own struggles with feeling constrained by royal expectations and family dynamics. "Charlotte," he said gently, "no child should have to make that kind of choice. And no member of this family should have to fight for their right to develop their own voice and contributions. If what you're describing has been happening, then we need to make significant changes to ensure it doesn't continue." Over the following days, the royal family engaged in a series of difficult but necessary conversations about power, authority, and decision-making within the household. Charlotte's allegations had opened up broader questions about how the monarchy should adapt to modern expectations while maintaining its traditions and constitutional functions. One of the most important outcomes of these conversations was a new framework for family decision-making that ensured proper consultation and transparency regarding the children's activities and development. Prince William and Princess Catherine were acknowledged as having primary authority over their children's upbringing, with other family members providing input and guidance only when explicitly requested. The changes also extended to media relations and public communications about the royal children. New protocols were established to ensure that all communications about Charlotte, George, and Louis were coordinated with their parents and reflected their actual activities and achievements, rather than strategic narratives designed by others. Perhaps most significantly, Charlotte's successful challenge to Camilla's schemes led to broader conversations about the role of young royals in modern Britain and the importance of allowing each family member to develop their unique contributions to the monarchy's service to the nation. However, the resolution of Charlotte's immediate concerns did not end the underlying tensions within the royal family. Camilla's response to the changes varied between grudging acceptance and subtle resistance, and it became clear that ongoing vigilance would be necessary to ensure that the new frameworks were properly implemented. Charlotte also discovered that standing up to established power structures, even successfully, carried its own challenges and responsibilities. Some family members and staff members viewed her with a new level of respect, recognizing her courage and analytical abilities. Others seemed uncomfortable with the idea of a young royal who was willing to challenge adult authority, even when that challenge was justified. The media attention that eventually emerged around the family's internal changes was carefully managed, but Charlotte understood that her actions had made her a more visible and potentially controversial figure within the royal family. She would need to navigate this new status carefully, balancing her commitment to authentic self-expression with her responsibilities to the institution and her family. As spring turned to summer, Charlotte reflected on the lessons she had learned from her confrontation with Camilla's schemes. She had discovered her own capacity for strategic thinking, evidence gathering, and principled confrontation. She had also learned about the importance of building alliances and the power of clear, honest communication. Most importantly, Charlotte had learned that challenging unjust systems was not only possible, but necessary, even when those systems were embedded within institutions and relationships that she valued. The courage to speak truth to power, she realized, was not just a personal virtue, but a responsibility that came with her privileged position within society. The summer months brought new opportunities for Charlotte to implement the lessons she had learned and to develop the leadership abilities that her struggle against Camilla had revealed. The royal family's summer schedule included numerous events and engagements that would test the new frameworks for decision-making and provide opportunities for Charlotte to demonstrate her capabilities in more authentic and substantial ways. As she prepared for these new challenges and opportunities, Charlotte felt a sense of confidence and purpose that had been missing during the months when she felt helpless against forces beyond her control. She had proven to herself and to her family that she was capable of identifying problems, gathering evidence, building support, and presenting compelling arguments for change. The experience had also strengthened her connections with staff members and family members who shared her commitment to the monarchy's authentic service to the public. These relationships would prove invaluable as she continued to develop her understanding of her role within the royal family and her contributions to its mission. Most importantly, Charlotte had established herself as someone who would not be manipulated or diminished by those who feared her potential. She had shown that she possessed both the analytical abilities and the personal courage necessary to protect herself and others from schemes designed to limit their development and influence. The Royal Guard, both literally and figuratively, now knew the truth about Charlotte's capabilities and character. They had witnessed her successful challenge to established power structures and her commitment to principles of transparency, fairness, and authentic service. This knowledge would shape their interactions with her for years to come and would influence how the royal household approached questions of authority, development, and change. Charlotte understood that her victory over Camilla's schemes was just the beginning of her journey toward becoming the kind of royal family member she wanted to be. The skills she had developed and the relationship she had built would serve her well as she faced new challenges and opportunities in the years ahead. The summer following Charlotte's confrontation with Camilla marked a period of profound transformation within the royal household, and Charlotte found herself navigating the complex aftermath of her successful challenge to established power structures. The changes that had been implemented as a result of her revelations created new opportunities, but they also brought unexpected challenges and responsibilities that tested her growing maturity and leadership abilities. The first major test came during the planning for the annual Royal Garden Party season. These events, traditionally used to honor citizens who had made exceptional contributions to their communities, provided an opportunity for Charlotte to demonstrate how the new family decision-making frameworks would work in practice. Under the previous system, Charlotte's role in these events would have been determined primarily by Camilla's assessment of what was appropriate and strategic. The young princess would likely have been assigned minor ceremonial duties that showcased her presence, without allowing her to engage substantively with the guests or the causes they represented. However, the new protocols required that decisions about Charlotte's participation be made through consultation between her parents and herself, with input from other family members welcomed but not determinative. This change created an opportunity for Charlotte to propose her own approach to contributing to these important royal occasions. Charlotte spent several weeks preparing a detailed proposal for her participation in the garden parties. She researched the backgrounds and achievements of the honored guests, identifying areas where her own interests and developing expertise might allow her to engage meaningfully with their work. She was particularly excited about the possibility of connecting with environmental scientists, youth advocates, and Commonwealth leaders who would be attending the events. Her proposal outlined specific ways she could contribute to making the garden parties more engaging and meaningful for younger guests, and for those whose work focused on issues that would affect future generations. She suggested creating special discussion areas where she could facilitate conversations about environmental conservation, international cooperation, and youth leadership. When Charlotte presented her proposal during a family planning meeting, the response was notably different from what it would have been just months earlier. Instead of dismissing her ideas as inappropriate or too ambitious for someone her age, her family members engaged seriously with her suggestions and offered constructive feedback about implementation. King Charles was particularly supportive of Charlotte's environmental focus, seeing it as an opportunity to strengthen the monarchy's commitment to sustainability initiatives. Prince William and Princess Catherine appreciated their daughter's thoughtful approach to preparation and her genuine desire to contribute meaningfully to royal duties rather than simply seeking attention or privileges. Even Camilla, who remained somewhat distant in her interactions with Charlotte following their confrontation, acknowledged that the proposal showed careful planning and appropriate understanding of royal responsibilities. Her response was civil and professional, though it lacked the warmth and enthusiasm that characterized her interactions with other family members. The garden parties themselves provided Charlotte with her first significant opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities in a public setting where her performance could be evaluated by both family members and external observers. The events drew hundreds of guests, including prominent figures from various fields who would be able to assess Charlotte's maturity, knowledge, and interpersonal skills. Charlotte's performance exceeded even her own expectations. She moved comfortably through the crowds, engaging in substantive conversations with guests who ranged from Nobel Prize-winning scientists to teenage climate activists. Her preparation showed in her ability to ask informed questions and to connect different guests with each other based on their shared interests and complementary expertise. One particularly memorable interaction occurred when Charlotte facilitated a conversation between Dr. Sarah Chen, a marine biologist studying coral reef preservation, and Marcus Williams, a 16-year-old who had organized successful beach cleanup campaigns in his coastal community. Charlotte's knowledge of both scientific and grassroots approaches to environmental conservation allowed her to help them identify potential collaboration opportunities. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Chen said to Charlotte after the conversation, "your understanding of these issues and your ability to connect people with different perspectives is remarkable. You have a real talent for bringing together the scientific community and youth activists in ways that could be genuinely transformative." Similar feedback came from other guests throughout the events. Charlotte's confidence, preparation, and authentic interest in their work impressed people who had initially expected to engage in polite but superficial conversations with a young royal who was fulfilling ceremonial obligations. The positive response to Charlotte's performance at the garden parties had several important effects on family dynamics and royal household operations. Most immediately, it validated the new decision-making frameworks and demonstrated that Charlotte's capabilities had been significantly underestimated under the previous system. Prince William and Princess Catherine felt vindicated in their support for their daughter's more substantial involvement in royal duties. They had always believed in Charlotte's potential, but seeing her succeed in such a public and demanding context confirmed their assessment and strengthened their confidence in advocating for her interests. King Charles was equally impressed and began to see Charlotte as a valuable asset in advancing the monarchy's engagement with younger generations and contemporary issues. He started including her in planning discussions for other royal events and seeking her input on initiatives related to environmental conservation and international cooperation. The success also had important effects on staff members throughout the royal household. Many of those who had supported Charlotte during her struggle against Camilla's schemes felt proud of their decision to stand with her, and their loyalty to her was strengthened by seeing her vindicated in such a visible way. Officer Peterson, Mrs. Davies, Miss Mitchell, and other staff members who had provided crucial support during Charlotte's investigation and confrontation found that their own positions within the household were enhanced by their association with her success. The royal family's recognition of Charlotte's capabilities extended to recognition of those who had supported her development. However, the aftermath of Charlotte's success also revealed ongoing tensions and challenges within the royal household. While most family members and staff had accepted the changes that resulted from her confrontation with Camilla, some remained uncomfortable with the precedent that had been set. A few longtime royal staff members expressed private concerns about what they saw as a dangerous shift in traditional hierarchies and decision-making processes. They worried that Charlotte's successful challenge to adult authority might encourage other young royals to question established protocols and expectations in ways that could undermine institutional stability. These concerns were generally expressed quietly and indirectly, but Charlotte became aware of them through her ongoing relationships with staff members who remained loyal to her. She realized that her success had created new responsibilities for maintaining the positive changes while respecting legitimate concerns about institutional continuity and stability. Camilla's response to Charlotte's success was complex and evolved over time. Immediately following the garden party events, she maintained a correct but distant relationship with Charlotte, acknowledging her achievements while avoiding the kind of warm engagement she showed with other family members. However, as weeks passed, it became clear that Camilla was reassessing her approach to Charlotte and beginning to recognize that continued opposition would be both futile and potentially damaging to her own position within the family. The evidence of Charlotte's capabilities and the family's support for her development made it impossible to continue arguing that she needed more restrictive guidance. Gradually, Camilla began to engage more positively with Charlotte, though their relationship remained somewhat formal and careful compared to Charlotte's relationships with other family members. This evolution suggested that Camilla was adapting to the new reality rather than embracing it enthusiastically, but it represented a significant improvement from the previous dynamic of manipulation and control. Charlotte's growing confidence and influence within the royal family also created new opportunities for her to support other family members and to contribute to broader institutional development. She began to serve as an informal advisor to her younger brother Louis, helping him understand royal protocols and expectations in ways that supported his authentic development rather than constraining it. Her relationship with Prince George also evolved as he began to see her not just as his sister but as someone who had successfully navigated complex family dynamics and established her own voice within the royal structure. George was approaching his own transition to more substantial royal responsibilities, and Charlotte's experience provided valuable insights for his preparation. Perhaps most significantly, Charlotte's success encouraged other young royals within the extended family to think more ambitiously about their own potential contributions to the monarchy's mission. Cousins and family friends began reaching out to her for advice about balancing personal development with royal expectations and about standing up for their own interests within institutional frameworks. The summer also brought international recognition of Charlotte's emerging role within the royal family. Commonwealth leaders who had met her during official events began specifically requesting her participation in youth-focused initiatives and environmental programs. This international interest validated her parents' decision to support her expanded role and created new opportunities for her to represent British interests abroad. One particularly significant development was an invitation for Charlotte to address a United Nations Youth Climate Summit scheduled for the following year. The invitation recognized her growing expertise in environmental issues and her ability to connect with young people from diverse backgrounds. Accepting the invitation would represent a major milestone in her development as an international representative of the British monarchy. The family discussions about this opportunity revealed how much the decision-making dynamics had changed since Charlotte's confrontation with Camilla. Rather than being told whether she could or should accept the invitation, Charlotte was included as a full participant in evaluating the benefits, risks, and logistical requirements of such a significant international commitment. The conversations demonstrated Charlotte's growing sophistication in thinking about royal duties and international relations. She understood that accepting such a prominent international role would raise expectations for her future contributions and would require sustained commitment to developing her expertise in climate science and international cooperation. After careful consideration and extensive preparation planning, the family decided that Charlotte should accept the UN invitation, with appropriate support and guidance to ensure her success. The decision represented a clear vindication of Charlotte's approach to developing her royal role, and a rejection of the more restrictive vision that Camilla had previously promoted. As autumn approached, Charlotte reflected on the profound changes that had occurred in her life since she first began to notice and challenge Camilla's schemes. The shy, frustrated girl who had felt helpless against adult manipulation had developed into a confident young woman who could hold her own in complex family discussions and international diplomatic contexts. The transformation had not been easy or comfortable. There had been moments of self-doubt, family tension, and personal stress that tested Charlotte's resilience and determination. But the experience had also revealed capabilities and strengths that might never have emerged under a more restrictive and controlling approach to her development. Most importantly, Charlotte had learned that challenging unjust systems was not only possible but essential for personal growth and institutional health. Her successful confrontation with Camilla's schemes had not only protected her own interests, but had also strengthened the royal family's ability to adapt to changing expectations and to develop the authentic leadership that modern Britain needed from its monarchy. The Royal Guard. Both the literal security personnel and the broader network of staff and family members who supported the monarchy's mission had indeed learned the truth about Charlotte's character and capabilities. They had witnessed her transformation from a concerned child into a capable young leader who could navigate complex challenges while maintaining her commitment to service and institutional values. Looking ahead to new challenges and opportunities, Charlotte felt prepared to continue building on the foundation she had established. She understood that her success had created both privileges and responsibilities, and she was committed to using her growing influence to support positive change within the royal family and in the broader society it served. The story of Charlotte's confrontation with Camilla's schemes had become more than just a personal victory. It had become a model for how young people could challenge established power structures while respecting institutional values and working constructively for positive change. The royal household, and the monarchy itself, had been strengthened by Charlotte's courage to stand up for truth and authenticity in the face of manipulation and control. As she prepared for her upcoming international responsibilities and continued development as a royal leader, Charlotte carried with her the confidence that came from knowing she had successfully defended her right to develop her own voice and contributions. The royal family and the nation it served would benefit from her authentic leadership for many years to come.